We welcome into the rally exclusively on Twitter, Marc Raimondi. Check him out at MMAfighting.com. Marc, we're just about 24 hours away from UFC 207, which means the return of Ronda Rousey to the octagon. First of all, the hype for the fight. We saw, obviously, at 205 in New York City and UFC 200 this summer. Has this equaled those with the return of Ronda? How do you gauge what we've seen so far with Ronda's return?
I would have said certainly in the past that Rousey's return would have been one of the most hyped about, one of the most buzzed about fights of the year, maybe ever for the UFC, but it hasn't felt that way. Part of it, I think, and probably a large part of it, is that Rousey hasn't done much media. You know, she did the interview on Ellen a few weeks ago. She talked to Conan O'Brien on his show a few weeks ago, but hasn't sat down with any media on site in Las Vegas all week. She hasn't done anything, I think, except for maybe ESPN. But there hasn't been any videos. There hasn't been any, any of those famous Rousey sound bites. There hasn't been any headlines really about Rousey necessarily. And I think that's part of why the buzz has been subdued. I still think that it'll do very well on pay-per-view. I don't know if it'll do as well as a UFC 205 or maybe even as well as some past Rousey fights. But yeah, I don't think there's as much buzz that there could have been for this fight.
We saw her at the weigh-in today. She looked great. I think we'd all kind of anticipated that. We'd heard that the weight cut was not a problem for Ronda. Getting down to 135, saw the Lioness there. She looked great as well as the champion. What'd you make of the weigh-ins today?
I thought Rousey looked fantastic. I think that she looked as good as she's ever looked at a weigh-in that I've seen. I mean, she just looked incredible. I think she's actually been on weight all week. Now, that may not be the best thing for some people, but it seems like she's in much better shape, and that does speak to a mindset. Now, we haven't heard from her as far as verbally doing interviews and answering questions, so we don't know really what she's thinking and what's going on in her head. But I think her being in shape speaks to her mindset. I think that she's probably in a good place mentally right now. I mean, if she wasn't, she wouldn't be in this great shape, right? She wouldn't have gotten into the gym and worked as hard as she obviously did for this fight. I think it's a good sign. I think that if you look back at her before the Holly Holm fight last year, she did not look this way. She was not nearly as ripped before the fight.
No.
Now that could mean any number of things, but I think this is a good sign for Ronda to look as well as she